The last time I stood in the Brookhaven Lane house, I already knew I wasn't coming back. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't cry. I just moved through those rooms one final time, touching nothing, taking only what fit in 2 bags, and walked out the front door like I was stepping out for groceries. That was 2.5 years ago. I have not allowed myself to think about it on most mornings, but some mornings it finds me anyway. This was one of those mornings. I was at the kitchen sink when it hit me. Not a memory exactly, more like a pressure behind the sternum, there and gone before I could name it. I set it down the way I've learned to set things down. Turned the faucet off, dried my hands, went back to what I was doing. I have lived in this house on the east side of Charlotte for over 30 years. This is where I raised my son, where I learned what it meant to be somebody's mother without anyone handing me the title. Legally, I was his stepmother. In every way that ever mattered, I was the woman who stayed. I never sold this house. I told myself I kept it for practical reasons. That was not entirely true. I was folding dish towels when I heard the knock. He was standing on the porch with a bouquet of mixed flowers wrapped in brown paper, the kind from a real florist, not a gas station, and that particular expression he has worn since he was a boy, like he is slightly embarrassed by his own tenderness. Alton, my son, 38 years old, a man who has built more than I ever imagined, standing in this doorway watching him grow up, and still, he holds flowers like he isn't sure what to do with his hands. I let him in without a word and put the kettle on. We sat the way we always sit, at the kitchen table, unhurried, no performance between us. He told me about the last stretch of travel, 2 years of it, near enough. Contracts across 3 states, weeks away at a time, the kind of building that doesn't stop once it starts. Lately, even when he was home, he said the Brookhaven house no longer felt settled the way he remembered. Little tensions, small distances he could never quite put a name to before he had to leave again. He said it casually, like a man thinking out loud instead of confessing a worry. The Brookhaven Lane house had always been more symbol than destination for both of us. A thing between us that meant something, even when neither of us was standing in it. He asked about his daughter, 4 years old, all motion and no fear, a child I love from a distance that has grown wider than it should. I asked if she was well. He said she was perfect. If you are watching this, and you know what it is to love a child from further away than you deserve to be, drop something in the comments. Tell me what time you're watching. I don't want to carry this alone tonight. He set his cup down and looked at me with that same expression. Gentle, direct, the way he has always looked at me when something is sitting between us unspoken. Mom, he said it quietly. Why aren't you living in the Brookhaven house? I did not hesitate. I was tired of hesitating. I told him Camson's family were living there. I told him I was not asked to leave. I was pushed out. And then, because the question was right there, and I had carried the rest of it for 2.5 years, I told him the truth. I swore I never would. Your wife put her hands on me, Alton. I left so I wouldn't have to tell you that. I didn't want you caught between us. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for words. He went completely still, the particular stillness of a man who is not reacting because he is deciding. He stood, kissed my forehead, said he loved me, and left. I sat at that table for a long time after his car pulled away. Something I had held in silence for 2.5 years had just ended in 3 sentences. I could not take it back. I did not want to. What I did not know, what I could not have known sitting in that kitchen, was that his silence was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. The chair by the window is where I go when something is too heavy to carry standing up. I sat it after Alton's car disappeared from the street, and I did not move for a long time. Not because I was broken, because I was finally still. 2.5 years of managed mornings and careful phone calls, and I had just handed all of it to my son in 3 sentences. My body did not know what to do with the absence of that weight, so I let the memories come. Not in a rush, in the quiet, ordered way of a woman who has learned that the past will wait for you to be ready before it shows you everything. The first year at Brookhaven Lane was the best year I had known in a long time. That house was proof of something I'd spent decades quietly doubting, that my place in Alton's life was real, permanent, not conditional on being useful or invisible or careful enough. He had built something, and the first significant thing he did with it was put a roof over my head. I used to walk through those rooms in the early mornings before the neighborhood woke up and feel something close to settled. Kamsin was never warm. But in that first year she was civil, and civil was enough for me. I was not asking to be loved by her, I was asking for space to exist. The comments started small, casual, the kind of thing a woman can say, with a smile still on her face. "You know the deed is in Alton's name, right?" said once over breakfast, like a reminder about something practical. Then again, differently framed. This is really his house when you think about it. Each one landing in the specific place where an old wound already lived, because I had been hearing a version of that sentence my entire time in Alton's life. "He is not your son. You have no legal right. You are a stepmother." Kamsin did not create that wound. She just knew exactly where it was. I started moving differently in that house, quieter, smaller, taking up less space in rooms I was supposed to own. Then one afternoon, she crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. We were in the kitchen. I don't remember now what started it. Some small thing, the kind of thing that was never really about itself. Her voice rose, mine stayed level. And then her hand connected with the side of my face. Once. Just once. But the slap itself was not the thing that made me leave. It was what I saw immediately afterward. No panic in her, no shock at herself, no reaching to apologize. She just stood there breathing hard and looking at me with the particular confidence of a person who already believes the room belongs to them. And in that moment, I understood something with complete clarity. The hand was not the beginning of a loss of control. It was the end of restraint. I saw the next year before it happened. The escalation, the rewriting, the slow campaign to make me look unstable in my own home while Alton traveled from city to city, believing everything was fine because both women in his life were protecting him from the truth in opposite directions. I understood then that staying meant war, not one argument, not one slap. A war that would eventually force Alton to choose publicly between his wife and his mother, in a way that would scar him no matter which side he stood on. I stood there in the kitchen of the house my son gave me and understood with complete clarity that I had two choices. I could call the police. I thought about it, not in a panic, but plainly the way I think through most things. A report, Kamsin's name on a legal document. Alton pulled between his wife and his mother, with no clean exit from either direction. Kamsin was the kind of woman who would minimize it, reframe it, manage the narrative. And Alton would be left holding a wound he could never fully set down. I would not do that to him. I packed over the course of a week, slowly, so it looked like a choice instead of a flight. I moved back to the east side, and the next time Alton called I told him, I missed my old neighborhood. He believed me because I said it the same way I say everything, without flinching. I protected his peace. I told myself for 2.5 years that I had made the right call. Sitting in that chair by the window, his car long gone, the house around me quiet, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in all that time. I was not sure anymore. I did not find out all at once. That is the thing about being removed from a place. Information reaches you in pieces, and each piece arrives just late enough to hurt in a different way than the last. The neighbor's name was Miss Verdell. She had lived 3 houses down from Brookhaven Lane since before Alton bought the property, and when I left, she kept my number without making a production of it. She called every few weeks. "Just checking in," she would say. And then, in the way of women who have watched neighborhoods long enough to read them like weather, she would mention what she had seen. Magnolia Dawson her first. A visit, the way Kamsin framed it. A mother coming to spend some time with her daughter. Miss Verdell noticed the bags. Too many for a weekend. Not quite enough for a move. The particular in-between that means someone is testing how long they can stay before anyone objects. Godfrey came 2 weeks later, Brecken not long after that. Each arrival quiet, each one presented as temporary, each one becoming permanent the way water becomes ice. So gradually you almost miss the moment it sets. Alton did not know. Or rather, he knew what Kamsin told him, which was that her family was visiting while some things were being sorted. He was traveling most of that period. Long contracts, weeks away at a time. Sometimes flying in only long enough to sleep one night before heading back out again. By then, he rarely stayed at Brookhaven Lane long enough to notice the slow accumulation of another family inside it. He trusted his wife. And because I had already moved out and kept insisting, I preferred my old neighborhood. He believed the house was simply evolving around the life he thought they were building together. He did not press for details because she did not give him a reason to. What he gave me without knowing it were pieces. On our calls, easy, unhurried, the way our calls had always been. He would mention things in passing. Kamsen's mother had people over last weekend. Sounds like she's been getting the place fixed up. Said, with no weight behind it. Said like a man describing weather. I would make a small sound of acknowledgement and move the conversation somewhere else. I absorbed every word and held it alongside what Miss Verdell had told me, and I said nothing. Over those months, I built a picture. And when the picture was complete, I understood something I had not fully understood before. Why the house specifically? Alton gave me that house before he gave Kamsen anything comparable. In the world he was building, among the people who knew him, the associates who watched him move, that act announced something she could not argue with or undo by talking. The Brookhaven Lane house was the first public declaration of what mattered most to him, not his wife, his mother, the woman who stayed. Kamsen could not erase that declaration, so she replaced it. Magnolia's taste on the walls, Godfrey's habits in the yard, Brecken's car in the driveway like a flag planted in territory. One redecorated room at a time, she turned my address into a Dawson's address, turned Alton's statement about me into a statement about her family. It was not impulsive, it was methodical, and it had worked. For 2.5 years it had worked, because I had let it. I was sitting with that understanding, cold and complete when my phone rang. Alton. I answered on the second ring. He did not ask how I was. He did not ease into it. His voice was level in the way it gets when he is holding something down with both hands. Did she ever put her hands on you? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. I looked at the phone in my hand and felt something shift in my chest. I had told him she hit me, but the way he asked, specific, direct, like a man confirming something he already suspected, told me the question had been living in him longer than this afternoon. He had known something, or felt something, for longer than I realized. I answered him the way I answer most hard things, plainly without reaching for softness to cushion the edges. Yes, I said, once, 2.5 years ago, in the kitchen. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man searching for words. It was the silence of a man who had just had something confirmed that he had been hoping was wrong. I have known Alton for over 30 years. I know the difference. He asked me 3 questions. Quietly, specifically, the way he approaches everything that matters to him. When exactly? Where in the house? Whether it happened more than once. I answered all 3 without hesitation. Once. The kitchen. A Tuesday afternoon in October, 2.5 years ago, I told him I did not call the police because I did not want his wife's name on a report he would have to carry. I told him I left because I chose to. Not because she frightened me, but because staying would have forced a confrontation. I did not believe he was ready to survive cleanly. He stayed quiet for a moment, longer than before. Then he said something that settled differently in me. I knew something wasn't right in that house. Not dramatic, not shocked, just tired. He told me there had been stretches during those last years where every time he came home, the atmosphere felt slightly altered. Rooms colder, conversations shorter, tension disappearing too quickly whenever he walked in. He said he kept telling himself it was stress, travel, adjustment, marriage settling into itself. But every time he asked either of us directly if something was wrong, both of us protected him in opposite directions. That hurt more than I expected. Because he was right. He did not respond to the rest of it directly. What he said after a pause that had weight in it was, "I love you, Mama. I'll handle it." Then the line went quiet. I held the phone in my hand for a moment before setting it down. The memory came the way it always comes when I stop holding it back. Not loudly, but with precision. It was a Tuesday. Alton was in Raleigh for a site meeting. Kamsen and I had been in the same house all morning without speaking, which was not unusual by then. The kitchen. I was at the counter. She came in and said something. I no longer remember the specific words, only the tone, which was the particular tone she used when she wanted me to feel the size of my own insignificance. I did not raise my voice. I told her clearly that I would not be spoken to that way in my home. She looked at me for a moment, then her hand moved. It was not a wild swing. It was controlled, deliberate. The kind of thing a person does when they have already decided and are simply executing the decision. I stood there in the kitchen that Alton built for me and understood, with a calm that surprised even me, that nothing would ever be the same in that house again. Not because of the pain, because of what the act revealed. She had just shown me exactly how far she was willing to go. And she had done it in a house where she had no legal standing, which told me she was counting on my silence to protect her. She was right to count on it. That was the part I had never made peace with. I sat in the chair by the window for a long time after the call ended, not crying, not planning, just sitting inside the unfamiliar feeling of having nothing left to protect. The weight I had carried for 2.5 years was not gone, but it had shifted. It was no longer mine alone. Alton was holding it now, and whatever he did with it was out of my hands. That should have felt like relief. It felt like standing at the edge of something I could not see the bottom of. 24 hours passed. Alton did not call. I did not expect him to. What I did not expect was Kamsin. Her text came through on a quiet Monday evening, casual in the way of someone trying very hard to sound casual. Hey, have you heard from Alton? He's not picking up. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the table. She was not reaching out to me. She was reaching out because every other door had already gone silent. And if Kamsin Coulter was texting her mother-in-law looking for her husband, she was not just worried. She was afraid. Miss Verdell called at 10:30 the following morning. She did not open with pleasantries. She said, "There was a man at the Brookhaven house yesterday afternoon. Unfamiliar car. He went in and out twice with papers in his hand. Stayed about an hour." She paused the way she always pauses when she is deciding how much to editorialize. "I thought you should know." I thanked her and set the phone down. I did not need her to tell me who the man was or what the papers meant. Alton has handled every significant thing in his life the same way he handled his grief at 12 years old, quietly, completely, with no loose ends left behind. I knew the shape of what was happening before Miss Verdell finished her sentence. A man with documents. An hour at the property. That was not a conversation. That was the beginning of a process. Not the beginning from nothing. That was important. Alton was too careful a man to move attorneys and property matters into place overnight on emotion alone. Looking back now, I think the Mother's Day conversation did not create his suspicions. It finalized them. Whatever he was doing now had likely started quietly before he ever sat at my kitchen table, asking why I no longer lived in the house he built for me. I went to the kitchen and made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs. Toast. The kind of morning routine that tells your body the day is ordinary even when nothing about it is. I ate slowly and let the information settle. Alton had not called. I did not expect him to. Not yet, not while he was moving. When he has something in motion, he does not narrate it. He builds it first and speaks after. I learned that about him when he was still a teenager. Saving money in an envelope he thought I did not know about. Planning something he would not tell me until it was done. He has always been that way. Deliberate, contained. A man who does not announce his intentions because he understands that intentions mean nothing until they are executed. I was not afraid of what he was doing. I was watching from a distance with the particular patience of a woman who has released a truth and is now waiting for it to move through the world at its own speed. Kamsin called at noon. I let it ring. She called again at 2:30. I watched the screen until it went dark. I did not feel satisfaction in not answering. What I felt was simpler than that. A clean sense that there was nothing I could offer her in that moment that would serve either of us honestly. She was not calling to apologize. She was calling because the silence around her was getting louder, and she needed someone to break it. I was not going to be that person. The afternoon moved slowly, the way afternoons do when you are waiting for something you cannot name yet. I folded laundry. I watered the 2 plants on the windowsill. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the street and thought about the boy Alton was at 12, standing at his father's graveside in a suit 2 inches too short, not crying, just watching, and the man he had become from that moment forward. He had never once made me regret staying. At 7:40 in the evening, my phone lit up. A text from Alton. "I love you, Mama, don't worry." 5 words. I read them 4 times. Then I set the phone face down and went to bed. I slept the way I had not slept in longer than I could honestly account for. Deeply. Without interruption. Without the low-level vigilance that had lived behind my eyes for 2.5 years. My body knew something my mind was still catching up to. The carrying was done. I woke to gray morning light and a message from Miss Verdell. "Something happened over here this morning. Papers. More than one. You need to call me." Miss Verdell told it to me in pieces, the way she tells everything, carefully, in the order she witnessed it, without embellishment. A man arrived at the Brookhaven Lane house at 8:45 that morning, unfamiliar, suited. He carried a flat envelope, and he did not look like someone making a social call. He knocked once. Magnolia answered. Miss Verdell recognized her from the months of watching, and the man handed her 2 separate documents, said something brief. Magnolia took the papers, and the man walked back to his car and left. The whole exchange lasted less than 4 minutes. Miss Verdell said Magnolia stood in the open doorway for a moment after he drove away, looking down at what was in her hands. Then she stepped back inside and closed the door. That was all Miss Verfity saw from where she was standing. It was enough. I sat with the phone in my lap and put it together without needing anyone to explain it. 3 days since Mother's Day. Alton had moved with the particular speed of a man who had not started planning on Sunday. Men like Alton do not contact attorneys, prepare files, arrange occupancy notices, and have papers served across multiple issues in 72 hours, unless the conversations had already begun quietly somewhere underneath the surface. He had perhaps been carrying a readiness for longer than either of us knew, and once given the truth, he simply finished what was already half built in his mind. 2 documents. One for the marriage, one for the house. I let myself imagine the scene inside. Magnolia at the door, papers in hand, reading the first line and understanding enough to call for Kamsin. Kamsin, coming down the hallway still unknowing, reaching for what her mother was holding, her eyes finding the words that changed the shape of everything. Brecken somewhere behind them, voice rising before he had even read to the bottom. Godfrey going the other kind of still. Not the stillness of a man deciding, but the stillness of a man who has just understood that there is nothing left to decide. The particular silence that falls in a room when every person in it realizes simultaneously that the ground has shifted and not one of them has higher ground to move to. I know that silence. I have lived inside versions of it. I did not feel triumph sitting in my chair on the east side of Charlotte. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was heavier than triumph and more complicated than satisfaction. I thought about Magnolia standing in that doorway, a woman who had moved herself into a house that was not hers. Yes, but also a mother who had come when her daughter called, the way mothers do, without knowing the full weight of what she was walking into. I thought about Godfrey, about Brecken, about people who had benefited from a wrong without being the ones who committed it. And then I thought about my granddaughter, 4 years old, somewhere inside that house when the knock came. Too young to read the room and old enough to feel it. Children that age absorb everything. The shift in a voice, the stillness in a body, the specific quality of a silence that means the adults are afraid. She would have felt all of it without a single word being spoken to her. That thought sat in me differently from all the others. The 30-day clock was running now. At that house, something was fracturing, not just between Kamsin and Alton, but between Kamsin and her own family. That fracture had its own momentum, and I could not stop it from here. My phone lit up on the cushion beside me. Kamsin. This time I picked up. She opened with my name, not Mama, not any of the careful pleasantries she used to manage distance between us. Just, Eunice, said in the voice of a woman who has nothing left to manage with. I did not speak. I waited. The crying came before the words, not the performed kind, not the strategic kind that a woman uses when she needs a man to soften. This was the crying that happens when every door has closed, and the last one just locked from the outside. I recognized it. I had heard that sound in my own chest in the kitchen of the Brookhaven Lane house 2.5 years ago, though I had not let it reach my throat. She said she was sorry. She said it 3 times in 3 different ways. The first with her voice still trying to hold itself together. The second when it gave up trying. The third almost a whisper, like she was saying it to herself as much as to me. She said she knew she had no right to ask me for anything. Then she asked anyway. She wanted me to talk to Alton, to tell him. She did not finish the sentence cleanly. To tell him something. That she understood. That she was sorry. That she was not the woman she had been in that kitchen. I am not certain she knew exactly what she wanted me to say to him. I think she just needed one voice to carry something toward him, because every channel between them had gone silent. I let her finish. I did not offer comfort. And I did not condemn her. I held the phone and listened the way I have always listened to hard things. Completely, without flinching, storing everything she gave me, and returning nothing that would tell her which way I was leaning. When the line went quiet, I asked her one question. How is she? Your daughter. Where is she right now? The silence that followed was different from all the silences in this conversation. I heard Kamzan's breath change. Not more crying. Something underneath crying. Something that had no name but that I recognized as the specific pain of a person being seen clearly by someone they wronged. She told me the child was with a sitter, that she was fine, that she did not understand what was happening. I said, good. Make sure she stays that way. Then I told Kamzan I would think about it and ended the call. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table and sat with my hands flat on the wood, not praying, not planning. Just sitting inside the particular stillness of a woman who has just been handed something she did not ask to hold. That child did not choose any of this. She did not choose her mother's pride or her grandmother's silence, or the 2.5 years of maneuvering that happened in rooms she was too young to read. She was 4 years old, and whatever happened next, divorce, displacement, a family fractured down the middle, she would carry the shape of it in her body long after she forgot the details. Children do not remember events. They remember feelings. They remember what it felt like to live inside a house where something was wrong. I knew that. I had known it since Alton was 7 years old, standing in a doorway that had too much silence in it. The phone stayed face down for a long time. Then I turned it over and scrolled to a name I had not called in weeks. My friend from church. A woman who has known me since before any of this existed. I needed to think out loud. And I needed someone who would not tell me what to do while I was doing it. She answered on the second ring the way she always answers, without fanfare, without performance, just present. Talk to me, she said, so I did. I told her everything in the order it happened. Not because she needed the chronology, but because I needed to hear it out loud in a voice that was not inside my own head. The Mother's Day visit. The question. What I told Alton. The call afterward. Kamzan's voice this morning, that particular crying that has no strategy left in it. The granddaughter with a sitter somewhere, too young to understand that the ground beneath her family was shifting. My friend listened through all of it without interrupting. That is her particular gift. Not wisdom exactly, but the discipline to stay quiet long enough for the other person to find their own. When I finished, she asked me one thing. What do you want, Eunice? Not Alton. Not that baby. You. I did not answer immediately. I sat with the question the way you sit with something that has more weight than its words suggest. The honest answer, the one I had been keeping at arm's length since Sunday, was that I had wanted to let it go, all of it. Let Alton do what he was doing, let the papers land where they landed, let Kamzan sit inside the consequences of every calculated decision she had made over 2.5 years. I had wanted that. I am not going to dress it in more dignified clothing than it deserves. For 3 days after Mother's Day, I let myself feel the anger fully. Not the managed kind I had been carrying in the old house. The real thing, the one underneath. The 2.5 years of small rooms and careful phone calls, and a kitchen I no longer had access to. The hit. The silence I chose that cost me more than I had ever said out loud to anyone. The specific loneliness of protecting someone so completely that they don't even know they needed protecting. I felt all of it. And I sat with the very real knowledge that if I stepped back and let this run its course, the world would understand. No one who knew the full story would blame me. But I kept coming back to the same thing. Not Kamzan, not the marriage. The woman I have been since I was standing in a doorway, after a funeral, deciding what kind of mother I was going to be for a 12-year-old boy who had not asked for any of what had happened to him either. I stayed then without being asked. I worked without being thanked. I answered every call with warmth I did not always feel, because the warmth was not about how I felt. It was about who I was. I was not going to abandon that woman now. Not because I was above anger. I was angry. I am still angry. But I refused to let the anger make this decision. Anger is not a foundation. It is a fire. And I had spent too many years building something real to burn it down for the satisfaction of watching someone else's house with it. I told my friend, I am going to call him. But I will not call him empty-handed. I have a condition, and I will deliver it from exactly where I am standing, which is higher ground than anyone in that house has right now. She did not tell me I was right. She did not tell me I was wrong. She said, then go make your call. I thanked her and ended it. I walked to the window and stood looking out at the street I have known for 30 years. The oak tree at the corner, the Hendersons' porch light, that never gets turned off, the particular quality of evening light on the east side of Charlotte that I have never seen anywhere else. Then I picked up the phone and called my son. He picked up before the second ring, no greeting. Just, "Mama," said in the voice of a man who had been waiting for this call and was not certain what it would carry. I did not ease into it. I told him I had thought about it, that I was not calling because I had forgotten what Kamzine did, or because 2.5 years in that old house had somehow become acceptable to me. I was calling because of his daughter, because a 4-year-old does not get to choose the wreckage she grows up inside. I was calling because I knew the man he had raised himself to be, and I did not want him to make a decision in anger that the better version of him would have to live with afterward. And I was calling because what was done to me was not going to become the stone that broke his family. That was not the legacy I wanted my name attached to. He was quiet for long enough that I checked the line was still connected. Then, "Are you sure?" Not a question the way most people ask questions. The way Alton asks things when he already respects the answer, but needs to hear it said completely. "Yes," I told him. "I am sure." Another silence, shorter this time. "Then tell me what you need," I told him. Before anything between him and Kamzine was discussed, before he withdrew a single document or opened a single conversation about the marriage, Kamzine would come to Brookhaven Lane in person. Not a phone call, not a message passed through him. She would knock on that door, stand on that porch, and speak to me face to face. Whatever she needed to say, she would say it there, at the house. My house. I heard him breathe in slowly. He did not promise me reconciliation. He did not tell me he was going to take his wife back, or that the papers were already being pulled. What he said was more careful than that, and more honest. "If she comes to you, I'll hear what comes next. That's all I'm agreeing to right now." That distinction mattered. He was not agreeing to forgive her. He was not promising the marriage would survive. The filings were still active. The attorneys were still involved. He was agreeing only to pause long enough to see whether the woman standing on that porch was the same woman who had stood in that kitchen 2.5 years earlier. He was handing me the opening position in something that was still unresolved. And he was doing it because I asked, and because in 31 years, I had never once asked him for anything like this. I understood what that cost him. "I'll tell her," he said. Then, "I love you, Mama." I told him I loved him and ended the call. I stood at the window for a moment without moving. The street outside was the same street it had always been. The oak at the corner, the Henderson porch light. Evening coming down slow over the east side of Charlotte, the way it does in late spring. Unhurried, like it has nowhere else to be. What I had just done was not the most painful thing I had ever done. The most painful was walking out of the Brookhaven Lane house with 2 bags and a story I could not tell anyone. This was different. This was harder in the specific way that choosing costs more than enduring. Enduring happens to you. Choosing, real choosing, the kind with full knowledge of the price, that comes from somewhere deeper than pain. I had chosen. Whatever Kamzine did with what Alton was about to tell her was no longer in my hands. 2 days passed. On the second evening, I was at the kitchen sink when I heard a car slow on Brookhaven Lane. Unfamiliar engine, careful speed, the particular hesitation of someone who has found the address but has not yet decided what to do with it. I dried my hands. I did not go to the window. I did not witness what happened inside that house. What I know I assembled over time, from what Kamzine eventually told me herself, and from what Miss Verdell observed from her side of the street. I have put it together the way you put together anything you were not present for. Carefully, with the understanding that some pieces will always have edges that don't quite meet. The process server came on a Tuesday morning. Miss Verdell saw him from her porch. The same suited man, the same flat envelope, the same unhurried professionalism of someone doing a job that does not require him to have feelings about it. Magnolia answered the door this time. She took the documents without understanding what they were. She read enough of the first page to know they were formal and serious and addressed to her daughter. Then she closed the door and called for Kamzine. Kamzine came downstairs and took the papers from her mother's hands in the hallway of a house that belonged to neither of them and read the first line of the divorce filing standing right there. Miss Verdell said the door stayed closed after that. No one came back to the porch. The house went quiet from the outside. Inside, from what Kamzine later told me, it was not quiet at all. Magnolia wanted answers immediately. What was this? What had happened? What had Camson done? Godfrey's first instinct was practical. Get a lawyer on the phone. Find out what their rights were as occupants. Do not sign anything. Brecken was the loudest and the most wrong. He said it was a pressure tactic. That Alton was a businessman, and businessmen do not detonate their own marriages over a family disagreement. That divorce papers get filed and withdrawn every day, and that nobody was going anywhere before somebody sat down at a table and talked this through like adults. Part of their confidence came from what Camson had spent months telling them before any papers arrived, that Alton knew they were there, that the arrangement was temporary but understood between husband and wife, that the house was family space, while things settled financially for everybody. Enough reassurance repeated enough times that by the time the notices landed, none of them fully understood how exposed they actually were. Camson listened to all of it and did not correct a single word. She told them she was handling it. She told them Alton was emotional and that once she spoke to him directly, everything would settle. She told them the notice to vacate was procedural, that it meant nothing by itself, that it required a whole separate legal process before anyone could be compelled to leave. Every sentence was constructed to buy time, not because she believed any of it, because telling them the truth meant telling them everything. The campaign against Eunice, the years of it, the kitchen, the hit, the 2.5 years of a woman living in a smaller house in silence because of choices Camson had made. She was not ready to stand in that room and say those things out loud to her own mother. So the days passed in a strained and brittle quiet. Magnolia made phone calls in the back bedroom with the door half closed. Godfrey sat in the living room with his arms folded and his jaw set, doing the thing men like Godfrey do when they feel the ground moving and have no information to stand on, going still and waiting for someone to tell them which direction to brace. Brecken moved between irritation and a confidence that had no foundation under it, and Camson moved through all of it, cooking, answering, managing, knowing that the clock was running and that each day she held the story together was one day closer to the morning. She could no longer hold it at all. On the 5th day, Magnolia stopped asking questions. She did not announce it. She did not make a speech. She simply stopped and started watching. Camson noticed it at the dinner table. Her mother's eyes moving across her face the way they moved when Camson was 16 and lying about where she had been. Not angry, not accusing, assembling. Camson understood then that silence from Magnolia was not patience. It never had been. It was the quiet of a woman who had stopped waiting to be told the truth and started finding it on her own. It was the look across the dinner table that broke it open. Camson told me this herself, weeks later, in the particular flat voice of someone recounting something they have already made themselves go numb to. She said her mother did not accuse her of anything that 6th evening. Magnolia simply looked at her, the way she had been looking since the 5th day, that quiet assembling look, and Camson understood that the window for controlling what her mother knew had already closed. Magnolia was not waiting for the truth anymore. She had built her own version and was sitting inside it. Camson sent Godfrey and Brecken out of the kitchen, just her and her mother at the table in a house that belonged to neither of them. And she started talking. She gave it in stages because she could not give it all at once. Not because she was protecting anyone, but because she was not strong enough to watch her mother's face move through all of it in a single sitting. The legal situation first. The house was in Alton's name. The notice to vacate was not procedural, it was binding. 30 days, and the clock had already been running for 6. The divorce filing was real, and it was moving. Magnolia's expression shifted from attention to alarm, but she did not speak. She was waiting for the part underneath. Camson gave it to her the next morning. Just the two of them again early, before the men came downstairs. She told her mother about the years of it, the way she had managed Eunice out of that house gradually, the campaign, the isolation, the careful management of what Alton knew and when he knew it. Magnolia's hands were flat on the table. Her face had gone to a place Camson could not fully read. Then Camson told her about the kitchen. One afternoon, once. The silence after that word was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a woman doing arithmetic she did not want to finish. Magnolia had told her daughter to hold her ground. She had said, more than once, from her own certainty, that a stepmother had no legal claim. that Eunice's presence in that house was an imposition on a real marriage, that Alton's loyalty belonged to his wife. She had said those things without knowing what they were feeding. But she had said them, and sitting at that table she understood that her words had been bricks in something she had not seen clearly until now. That realization did not break Magnolia open. It set her jaw. She called Godfrey and Brecken into the room that afternoon. Kamzin told it again, shorter this time, because there was no version of the second telling that was easier than the first. Brecken stood up before she finished. His voice came up fast and sharp. "You moved us into this woman's house and you never said a word about any of it. You used us." Godfrey did not raise his voice. He stood, left the room, and was packed before dinner. They did not leave because Kamzin asked. She never asked. They left because staying required a level of pretending none of them had left. Magnolia hugged her at the door the morning they drove away. Said nothing. Her arms were brief and her eyes were somewhere else entirely. Brecken did not look back. Kamzin stood in the doorway of the empty house and watched their car until it turned the corner. The house that had felt like a statement, her family's name over Eunice's door, felt now like the inside of something closing. She was alone. 3 days later, I heard a knock at the Brookhaven Lane door. I set down what I was holding. I did not rush. I took my time getting to the door, not to make a point, because I needed the walk from the kitchen to the front of the house to settle something in myself, to arrive at that door as the woman I had decided to be in this moment, not the one the last 2.5 years had been quietly trying to make me. I opened it. Kamzin was standing on the porch in a gray dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back simply. She looked like a woman who had made deliberate choices about how to present herself for this. Stripped down, nothing performative, nothing that could be read as trying too hard. I noticed that. It told me she had thought carefully about this moment. Whatever else she was not careless. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in height, in the particular way of a person who has had every source of borrowed authority removed and is standing in what is left underneath. She spoke first. "I know I have no right to be here asking you for anything." Her voice was level but thin, the voice of someone who has used up everything that was keeping it steady and is running on what is underneath that. "What I did to you, in your home, the things I said over those years, the way She stopped, started again. "I am sorry for putting my hands on you. I am sorry for every year of what came before it. I am sorry for where you had to go and how long you had to stay there." She did not reach for reasons. She did not offer context or sequence or the particular architecture of self-justification that people construct when they want to apologize and still come out of it looking understandable. She just said what she did, named it plainly, and stopped. I let the silence stand for a moment after she finished. Then I spoke. "My place in this family is not something that gets negotiated going forward. Not with you, not with anyone." I kept my voice even, not cold, not warm, simply clear. "My granddaughter comes to me when she wants to come. Not on a schedule you manage, not as something you arrange. She reaches for me the way a child reaches for someone who loves her. That does not change." Kamzin was watching me with the full attention of a woman who understood she is not in a position to respond to any of this with anything except listening. "This house is mine. That is not a conversation that gets reopened, not in this family, not in public, not in private. Nobody explains it, and nobody revisits it." I paused long enough for that to land completely. "And what happened between us, the kitchen, the years before it, the time I spent away from here, you don't speak of it, not to manage how people see you, not to explain yourself, not to anyone. It is finished. You leave it finished." She nodded, not eagerly, not the nodding of someone performing compliance. The nodding of someone who has arrived at the end of every other option and knows it. I looked at her for a moment longer. Then I stepped back from the door. I closed it gently, no weight behind it, no statement in the sound of it. I stood in the hallway of my house and let the quiet settle around me. Then I walked to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called Alton. "She came," I told him. A pause. "Then how did it go?" "It went," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "All right, Mama." I set the phone down and heard, 30 minutes later, the particular tone of a man who has picked up his phone to make a call he has been deciding on for days. He was calling his attorney. He called me on a Thursday morning, 9 days after Kamzin stood on my porch. No preamble. Just, "It's done, Mama. The filing is withdrawn." I sat down at the kitchen table. He told me the rest in the same quiet, methodical way he delivers everything that matters, one thing at a time, no flourish. The deed transfer had been signed and submitted. The Brookhaven Lane property would be recorded in my name within the week. Not held in trust, not managed through his company, my name, solely, permanently, untouchable by anyone, regardless of what happened in his marriage going forward, regardless of anything. Then he added something he had not said before. He said the lawyers had drawn up separation terms before the withdrawal was filed, counseling, financial boundaries, written occupancy protections, conditions that made sure no version of the last 2.5 years could ever quietly rebuild itself inside his marriage while nobody was looking. He said reconciliation was not forgiveness, and it was not forgetting. It was structure, and structure mattered when trust had already failed once. I said, Alton, he said, let me finish. So I did. He told me he had been thinking for a long time, longer than these past weeks, longer than Mother's Day, about the house itself, about the fact that he bought it for me years earlier, intending it to be my permanent home, but left enough ambiguity around ownership and access that another version of the story was eventually allowed to grow inside it. He said he understood now that uncertainty had become part of the problem, that if something belongs to someone, the structure around it should reflect that clearly enough that nobody can slowly negotiate them out of it, while calling it family compromise. Then he said something quieter. He said he had also been thinking about what it cost a person to protect someone else's peace so completely that the someone else never even knew there was a cost. He said he did not have language for what that kind of love looked like from the outside, only that he had been on the receiving end of it his entire life, and that he understood now, fully, what it had required of me. He said he was not going to make a speech about it, because a speech was not what it deserved. What it deserved was the rest of his life spent making sure I never carried anything alone again. I did not cry while he was talking. I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me. The call ended. Then I set the phone down on the table, and I let myself cry, not from sadness, not from relief exactly, but from the particular release of a woman who has been holding something so long that when it finally leaves her hands, she feels the shape of where it was. 2.5 years. Longer than that, if I am being honest. Decades of editing myself, making myself smaller, carrying quietly what I could not say out loud. It was not gone, but it was no longer mine alone. I wiped my face, got up, put the kettle on. Alton went back to Camden, not that week, not with warmth or immediacy. Deliberately, the way he does everything that costs him something. He went back on terms he set, in a marriage that now had a different shape than the one they had built before any of this began. There were conversations they had not yet finished having. Rooms in that marriage still under repair. Some trust returned slowly or not at all. Both of them understood that now. Eunice's place in that family was no longer a matter of relationship dynamics or Camson's willingness to tolerate proximity. It was structural, written into a deed, decided on a porch. The mechanisms that had made 2.5 years of silence possible. The ambiguity about the house, the managed distance, the slow erosion of a woman's certainty about where she stood. None of those mechanisms existed anymore. They had been removed, not in anger, in the specific, deliberate way of a man who builds things for a living and knows the difference between a structure that holds and one that only appears to. That was not cruelty. It was consequence. And consequence, unlike punishment, does not require anyone to administer it. It simply lives in the house with you. Months passed. The leaves came and went on the oak at the corner of my old street. I moved through the Brookhaven Lane house, the way a woman moves through a space that has finally, completely, become hers. Then Alton called one evening and asked if I would host. The first gathering, his family, my table, at my house. The Dawsons went back to their lives. That is the cleanest way to say it. What they went back to was smaller than what they had briefly believed they were connected to. And they knew it. And the knowing sat in each of them differently, the way the same weather feels different, depending on which room of the house you are standing in. Magnolia was the one I thought about most. Not with sympathies exactly, but with the particular understanding of a woman who knows what it is to carry something you built yourself. She had told her daughter that a stepmother had no legal claim. She had said it more than once, from the full confidence of a mother who believed she was arming her child with truth. She had not known what those words were being used to build. But they had been her words, said in her voice. And no amount of not knowing dissolved the fact of having said them. She could not be soft toward Kamsin without first being soft toward herself, and she was nowhere near ready for that. So she was hard instead. The calls between them became shorter, the silences longer. Magnolia had returned to a life that no longer had a Brookhaven Lane address attached to it. No more mentioning to people at church what her daughter's husband had built. No more quiet pride in proximity to something significant. That was gone. What replaced it was a woman sitting with the knowledge that she had encouraged her daughter to hold ground in a house that did not belong to them, in a situation she had not understood, and that her encouragement had cost everyone in the room something they could not get back. Brecken did not call Kamsin for 4 months. His anger was not about Eunice. It was not about the house. It was about being moved into a situation without the full picture, being used as presence, as weight, as family, as statement, without being told what statement was being made or at whose expense. That kind of anger is personal because it is about trust, and trust between siblings runs deeper than most people account for until it breaks. Godfrey said nothing, not to Kamsin, not about any of it. He had packed his things the night he heard the truth, and he had not reopened the subject since. Some men process by going quiet and staying there. Godfrey was that kind of man. The irony was not lost on any of them. I knew this because Kamsin told me, in one of the careful, measured conversations we began to have in the months that followed, that the hardest part of trying to explain herself to her family was the fact that the woman she had wronged was the reason she still had a marriage to defend. Every time she tried to build a case for herself, she had to walk past that. There was no version of the conversation where that fact did not sit in the center of the room, taking up space, refusing to move. Her victim had become her advocate, and her family could not forgive her for needing one. I did not invite the Dawsons to the gathering. I made that decision without consultation and without explanation to anyone. The gathering at Brookhaven Lane was for Alton's family, for the people who belonged to the life he had built from nothing, starting at 12 years old in a house on the east side of Charlotte, with a woman who had chosen to stay. I was the head of that table. I had always been. The morning of the gathering I woke before the light came fully through the bedroom curtains. I lay still for a moment, listening to the house, learning it the way you learn a place that has finally, completely, stopped feeling temporary. Then I got up, went to the kitchen, and I started to cook. The smell of it moved through the room slowly. Butter and something sweet underneath. And the particular warmth of a kitchen being used by a woman who is feeding people she loves in a home that has her name on the deed. It filled the house the way only belonging does. Alton arrived first. I heard his car on Brookhaven Lane before I heard the door. That particular engine, familiar to me now after years of listening for it from whichever house I happened to be in. I was at the kitchen counter when the knock came, and before I could cross the hallway, I heard the small voice on the other side of the door, impatient and certain the way 4-year-olds are certain about everything that matters to them. I opened it, and she came through the door like weather. She did not slow down when she reached me. She simply arrived, arms up, full weight committed, the complete and unconditional surrender of a small child who has never had a reason to doubt her welcome. I caught her and held her against my chest and felt her settle the way children settle when they are exactly where they intended to be. I stood in the hallway of my house holding my granddaughter and did not say anything for a moment. This was what 2.5 years in the old house had been protecting. Not a principle, not a position. This specific child, this specific weight in my arms, this ordinary and irreplaceable thing. Alton was watching from the doorway. He did not say anything either. He has never been a man who performs what he feels, and he did not start now. He just looked at me the way he has looked at me since he was a boy, directly, without flinching, and I understood everything in it that did not have words. Kamsin arrived 20 minutes later. She came in quietly. No performance in it. Not the performance of someone trying to appear humble, and not the performance of someone pretending everything was ordinary. She moved through the house the way a person moves through a space they understand completely. Its dimensions, its ownership, its meaning. She knew whose house this was. She moved accordingly. She helped in the kitchen when I let her. She sat where she was directed. She did not try to manage anything. The afternoon moved the way good afternoons move. Without urgency, without a program, with the particular ease of people who have been through something real together and come out the other side of it still standing. My granddaughter ate and spilled something and was entirely unconcerned about it. Alton fixed a cabinet hinge that had been loose since I moved back in, without being asked, because that is who he is. The food was good. The house held all of us without strain. In the late afternoon, my granddaughter climbed into my lap in the armchair by the window and fell asleep the way children fall asleep when they feel completely safe. Suddenly, heavily, without negotiation. I sat with her weight across me and watched the light move across the floor of my living room and did not move for a long time. Alton sat across from me at the end of the evening, and we did not talk about any of it. There was nothing left to say between two people who have always understood each other without requiring the words. When the house finally went quiet, I stood at my window. Brookhaven Lane in the dark, the granddaughter asleep in the back room. Alton's car still in the driveway. He was not ready to leave yet, and I had not asked him to. I was not thinking about Camson. I was not adding up what was taken or measuring what was returned or calculating who had been right about what. I was thinking about a morning a long time ago. The morning after a funeral. A 7-year-old boy at a kitchen table, looking at me with the specific eyes of a child who does not yet know who is going to stay. And the quiet decision I made in that moment about what kind of woman I was going to be for him. I did not make that decision because it was easy. I made it because it was true. Every hard choice that came after it, including the hardest one, came from that same place, that same woman. The one who stayed when she did not have to, who protected when it cost her, who chose even at the end, from love rather than from injury. I am still her. I was always her. I turned from the window and walked back through my house. My furniture, my pictures, my kitchen, arranged exactly as I arranged it. And the house received me the way it was always meant to. Quietly, completely, without condition.